Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome to the Means of Grace podcast. I'm Kim Ingram, Director of Ministerial Services with the Western North Carolina Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church.
And I'm Jesse Ennis, the Director of Communications for the Leadership Development Team of the Western North Carolina Conference.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our counties in North Carolina have issued stay-at-home orders. Therefore, in an effort to practice social distancing and reduce the spread of the virus, the episode has been recorded virtually. The Means of Grace team is committed to bringing you regular content and will continue to offer podcasts relevant to the ministry and mission within the context of our lives.
In this time, be encouraged by your faith in the Holy Spirit, which led each of you to your ministries. The Spirit led you all here for such a time as this. By the Spirit, you will receive all you need to lead your teams and your congregations through this. Even though you may feel alone, remember that we are all in this together.
On this episode of the Means of Grace podcast, we're going to be talking with three of our Western North Carolina Conference Earth Keepers. With Earth Day coming up, it seemed like a timely topic for conversation. Today, we want to welcome Jonathan Brake, who is the pastor of Woodmont United Methodist Church in Reidsville, and also Bill Garrard, who is a retired United Methodist clergy living in Hickory, and Kim Richmond, who is a member at Maple Springs United Methodist Church in Winston-Salem. We're glad to have you all with us.
Good to be here.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So why don't we start just learning a little bit about how you became interested in the work of creation care? Jonathan.
Well, my story really goes back to my childhood. My family were campers. We did a lot of camping. I grew up in the Scouts. And my father worked for the U.S. Census Bureau, which produced a lot of paper. And so we had a paper route for recycling long before recycling was a household name. And everywhere we went, we picked up glass bottles and aluminum cans and took them and sold them to earn money to pay for all of our extracurricular activities. We also grew a garden in the backyard in Charlotte. My father had grown up on a farm. So we did a lot of gardening, grew our own food, had some chickens in a chicken coop. And I just learned composting and all kinds of things was a way of life. And so it's always been a part of who I am. But as I grew older and got into ministry, I began to realize the way that we were treating our whole planet and the natural world around us was detrimental to life as we know it. And I saw how we treat people much the way we treat the natural world, as objects to use rather than individuals with worth and value. And so my ministry, as I've grown in a pastoral work and as I read scripture, what I discovered is that there's this link between who we are as human beings and God's greater picture of creation with the natural world that is so important to bring out in my ministry. And so for probably 15 or 20 years, I've been looking at ways to be involved in creation care.
Bill, will you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, as a boy, I remember with my dog just wandering in the woods and how wonderful that was just to be close to nature. And also, we would always have gardens, our family garden. That was one way we were able to feed our family. And then as I became a young adult, it was Jimmy Carter era of the energy crisis. And so everybody was wondering where our energy comes from and how we could conserve it. And so I remember at that time starting a folder on building a passive solar home. And I carried that folder around with me for years. I still haven't built that passive solar home, but I think that I still have that file. So I've been interested for a long time. And as a young adult, I did hiking on the Appalachian Trail. And then as a pastor, at St. Luke's in Hickory, we started doing some studying around creation care and creating a team there. And so that's how and then in retirement, I, get to choose whatever you want to do, what kind of ministry you want to do. So here's my chance. And so that was going to be my focus. And praise God, I've been able to do that.
Kim, what sparked your interest in creation care?
Well, although I grew up as an outdoors person and was in Girl Scouts and did a lot of hiking as a young adult, and I believe that my conversion to actual creation care has been a lot more recent. In late 2016, I was invited to a UMW, hear a speaker. And the speaker mentioned the book Earth, which is spelled with an extra A. It's written by Bill McKibben on climate change. And I read that book, and it was like an epiphany. I had heard so many mixed messages about climate change for so many years, and that one just struck the chord. And I went from that to a lot of prayer, and actually felt a call from God to raise awareness with others about the negative effects of climate change. And then I went from that concern with climate change to exploring what the United Methodist Church said about climate change. And through that, my interest kind of segued into the full bloom of creation care. And it was in 2017 that then I went into the Earth Keepers and became much more actively involved through the United Methodist Church with the creation care.
Kim, you mentioned the Earth Keepers. Can you explain to us what an Earth Keeper is and how does someone become one?
An Earth Keeper can be either lay or clergy within the United Methodist Church, and you just have to have an interest in caring for God's creation, in working on environmental issues. And there is I'm not sure what her position is, but within UMCOR Global Ministries, you can apply and you attend a training. And for me, it was a 6-day training. They have them around the country, and you just go and learn all about creation care, and you pick a project, because one part of Earth Keepers is wanting you to become actively engaged in creation care, not just having an interest. And so they help you pick a project. You come with a project usually, and they help you figure out how to put that project into action. And now they also have localized trainings that some of the other Earth Keepers are doing now, where it's not all just centralized through global ministries.
Jonathan, I wanted to ask you a question. Since you've grown up focusing on creation care, how have you seen that change over the years?
Great question. I've seen it change for me where it has touched me personally. And what I mean by that is when our third child was born, we had moved to a new appointment. I was in a parsonage that was on well water. And I can still remember being in the hospital trying to check out after she was born. And they handed us these papers and asked the question, are you on city water or well water? And when we said well water, they handed us the page that said, make sure you get your water tested. Make sure that if you're using well water, it's suitable for children. And so in that little church, I had church members who were farmers, and I asked them, how do you test your well water? And one of my members handed me a little kit. I put some water from the tap into the kit, mailed it off, got it back, and discovered that when you use a kit from a farmer, you get interesting results. And so the results for our well water was unfit for livestock. And we immediately thought, well, we should not be drinking this water, cooking with this water, bathing with this water. And thankfully, we were in a part of Union County, just outside of Charlotte, where a lot of new development was happening. And so the water lines were literally 6 feet from the well house. And so we had the trustees immediately connect our house up to municipal water to avoid that problem. Well, fast forward to the same child in 6th grade middle school. We were in Winston-Salem at the time, and she was attending a middle school that was a magnet school in sort of the industrial part of Winston-Salem. And there was a problem with groundwater making its way underneath the school campus from some of the industry nearby. And it was toxic and presented some medical health issues for the population. And so the same child who was challenged by dirty water at her birth was challenged again a few years later, and they had to move the entire school to a different facility and everything. And so it really struck home to us that the way we treat and take care of or don't take care of our environment can really affect us personally. And so that was a very interesting couple of events that took place in our life. And one other event that was interesting for me is we had a parsonage that we were living in several years ago where the same man had been doing the lawn care for about 20 years. And I asked him one day why the lawn in certain spots was growing a lot more weeds than grass. And he said, it's interesting. When we planted this particular kind of grass, it grew fine here in North Carolina. But in the last 10 years, it has gone, the line of where that grass grows well has constantly moved further north as climate has changed. And it's no longer suitable for our area. And so I began to realize these aren't just theoretical ideas. These aren't just scientists telling us things about the creation. These affect personal lives. And it's up to me as a pastor to lead my congregations forward in making a difference that really supports life in all of its forms instead of degrading our environmental areas. And so my direction forward in creation care really has come out of, in recent years, those personal experiences.
Okay, so how can a church become a better steward of creation?
Well, thankfully, there are a lot of resources today. There are plenty of books and websites. All you have to do is go on and Google creation care. You can look up United Methodist Church and the environment or creation care. There are a lot of denominational resources. There is the Earthkeeper program, as Kim was sharing with us, that is equipping United Methodists all across this country and around the world who can come and speak and share with your local church. And really, it starts grassroots for a congregation to have someone who is excited and interested about these issues to begin to gather together 2 or 3 other individuals in a congregation and begin to look at where can we start doing something. It may be changing lights to LEDs. It may be starting recycling in your church. It may be starting a community garden or turning part of the church lawn into a pollinator garden. It may be learning how to tap into resources in the community where you are. Maybe your town does a cleanup and you sign up to clean a creek bed or a street side. Maybe you sign up to help plant trees in town during the Arbor Day celebrations. There are a lot of different ways to get involved, and everything from education to activism to just roll up your sleeves and get things done in the community. But the big issue that I try to do is help people tie it back to their theology, to their faith, to their sense of why do we do this as a Christian and not just as an environmentalist in America. It's tied back into our biblical faith, and that makes all the difference for folks.
Bill, you mentioned that you started a creation care group. I think you said at St. Luke's early on. Could you tell us more about how you got people interested in it and what some of your priorities were as a group at St. Luke's?
Well, one of the things was simply to start with a study. And that is where you began, I think, in most cases. And then you start doing small things that raises awareness, and you connect what you're doing with what God says about that. Now, I often come back when I start with people, and my project is called Foothills Creation Care. It's an Earthkeeper. So I'm bringing in all kinds of denominations together locally here to support one another and help one another to become more creation care minded and active. So one of the things I would say is start small and do something, and then point to that and go back to the theology. So you're constantly going back and forth. You know, we are using dinnerware now, and we have people in the kitchen that are washing the dishes. Why? Because we don't want to do throwaways. Because God says right there in Genesis 1:26 that we're made in God's image, and so that we can be responsible for the creation. I mean, that's foundational. That's the kind of the first commandment, really, who we are and what God expects us to be. So I think you do the practical things, and then you always tie in the theological. And we need to encourage one another, because this is not easy work. People aren't thinking about this for the most part. They've got other things on their mind. And so you raise awareness, and then you say why this is important to the church.
So, Bill, what's one of the things that you all did at St. Luke's that just most excited you and got lots of people involved with it?
Well, one of the things was we looking at the dinner time and what we can do during dinner time. The churches like to eat together. So what is it that you can do that creates less waste? Can you take your compost, your waste food, and somebody take that waste and take it to their garden? And then look at your campus. What are the ways that your campus is it bird friendly? One of the things that we did in Foothills Creation Care Alliance is to work with North Carolina Audubon, and they did 2 workshops, presentations. One was how to make your yard or your church campus bird friendly. We have to have native plants so they have food to eat and shelter for their babies. And the second one was climate change and birds. Birds are kind of canaries in the coal mine. And so as we think about climate change, everybody has birds on their church campus in their backyard. So you connect that to what? Now, these are not necessarily things we did at St. Luke's, but these are things that we're working on to help churches be aware of and focus in on.
Kim, unlike Jonathan and Bill, you said that you became interested as an adult. And so I'm wondering, on your journey, what other resources have you found to be helpful for folks who are either disinterested or are now becoming more interested as adults?
I think the key to all of it is educating yourself and going to as many resources as you can that you have to be careful about legitimate resources. And there are many things on the internet that you can find, many books that are recommended that you can do. For example, I just recently went to a meeting at the the Piedmont Environmental Alliance, and you can go and become educated. So I think education is key because that raises awareness within yourself, but you do have to be careful about the resources. So that was why when I wanted to raise awareness, I thought, well, who do I want to raise awareness with? The first people that I thought of was my faith family. And so if you start with the United Methodist Church and look at the social principles, if you look at the bishop's foundation document from 2009, that is God's renewed creation, you can see that it is accepted and foundational within the United Methodist Church, of which we are already a part. So I think it was key for me to go to those things. And I was amazed, frankly, as a layperson, I didn't even know about the social principles. And so reading through things like that and seeing the broad-based foundation of creation care within my church was key. It was enlightening and it was empowering. So that would be one thing that I would recommend to everyone within the United Methodist Church. See what your church documents say about this.
Kim, we can reference those things in the show notes. So thanks for mentioning them. We'll put resources in the show notes.
Wonderful.
So we're in the midst of a pandemic, and people are kind of limited in where they can go and what they can do. Our churches are not gathering at this time. And I wondered, Jonathan, if you might have any recommendations for, especially with Earth Day coming up, and we all will probably still be staying at home when Earth Day comes up. I wondered if you have any recommendations for how individuals and families can be thinking about these ideas about creation care in their homes.
One of the things that comes to mind is we're being told that even though we're sheltering in our homes, one of the things we're allowed to do is to get outside. I'm seeing so many more people in my neighborhood who are out walking their dogs and getting exercise and taking advantage of greenways in the park. And as we do so, to be more aware of what's around us. So yesterday I took my dogs out in the backyard, and we have a new little couple of birds who have adopted last year's nest in the corner of our carport, and have laid a couple of eggs. And the mama bird was sitting up there on her nest, and I just stood there and spent time talking with her and saying a little prayer for God's creation and recognizing what is all around me. And so, even though we're separated from the church, we can look for ways to be in God's nature and recognize the worshipful sense that we can feel when we're out among the trees and lying on the grass and listening to the birds as they chirp, and just being aware of what is around us that God has blessed us with. So often we rush through life and we just zoom past everything. And right now we can actually find ourselves in the midst of God's creation, where there is less noise, fewer airplanes overhead, fewer cars and trucks going down the road, and we can be more aware of what's around us. And so I would just encourage families to take this time and recognize the blessings that are in the midst of it. I really expect we're going to hear more reports of how the reduced transportation and use of resources is making a difference in our environment and our climate change issues and problems around us. Will be one of the benefits that comes out of this shutdown of a nation. And we need to recognize those, celebrate them, and then ask ourselves, okay, as life gets back to what we might call normal, how do we not lose the benefits that we've gained along the way? And so those are going to be creative ways to think differently as families and as churches, and seek how God might move us in a different way to represent the bigger picture of all of God's kingdom.
I was reading that newsletter, and it did have some really easy tips that I'm not sure churches think of. One that I thought was a great one is just having somewhere for people to recycle their bulletins as they leave worship. And I thought that was an easy thing to do, and didn't know how often churches might do that. Tim, I wonder if you could tell us about some of the other ideas that you all have implemented at Maple Springs.
If I might add to usually our Foothills Creation Care Alliance will have a booth at Earth Day Fair in Hickory. And of course, people come by and they will tell us what they're doing in their church, and we will share with one another because we need to support one another. Of course, the fair is canceled this year, rightly so. But I was thinking about, we send out a monthly newsletter which gives you lots of suggestions and refer you to resources that you can use to think about what to do in your congregation or in your home. So I was thinking, as people are kind of sheltered in and staying home, they could look at how can we make our home more creation care minded? What is it we could do here? And actually, there's a new resource that's come out that is really put out by and you can go to this at the website, umccreationjustice.org, that has a number of creation care tips each month that you can do in your congregation or in your home. So if we're sheltered in, we can think about what can we do in our home that's more creation care minded, turning off the lights, lots of different things. How do we use water? How do we use, all of this? And then when we do that at home, then take it back to the congregation and say, I want to do this here. Put up a little sign and say, this is creation care. We suggest we do this or that. Kim has done lots of things at Maple Springs, I know, that have helped people become aware as they gather at Maple Springs. So this is something I think we could do and carry it from home to church. We always think of taking from church to home, but we can take it from home to church.
Well, sure. One of the most important things I felt when I came back from my Earth Keepers training was to talk to the staff at Maple Springs and tell them what I'd learned and to see if they were supportive. And I have to tell you that I couldn't have asked for a better response. And so we actually receive each October, we're called the Pumpkin Church. In October, the whole month of October, we sell pumpkins on our front lawn. And the money is used, it used to be used for the youth ministry. Now it's used for all of our missions and outreach. And we were getting our pumpkins from New Mexico. And after this, Mary Taylor, who is our children's ministry coordinator, who also coordinates with the pumpkin patch, we get them from the next county over. And so so much more sustainable the way that we get that, rather than all of that, the greenhouse gas emissions that go out there. And also she runs the of course the Vacation Bible School, and we went from using styrofoam plates to using a church member bought reusable plates that were great for the kids, and we have a commercial dishwashing system already, and so we use all of those plates, and it saves about 1,000 styrofoam plates going into the trash each Vacation Bible School that we've done. We also use no individually packaged products for the Vacation Bible School. We now put all of it out. And little changes like that. We already had a bit of a recycling program where we had trailers out on our campus that accepted newspapers. And we decided to expand that program into having recycling bins throughout the church and having members of the congregation who volunteer to take those recycling bins home each week and put them with their trash, or their recycling, not their trash, but their recycling. And so there was no additional cost to the church whatsoever. And we took the papers out to the newspaper trailers. And so we expanded that program. We've done a number of things where we have a men's program. Often they'll have a meal and they make sure that they use the reusable dishes, as Bill was saying on some of these, and as Jonathan. If you can just, a lot of it is just awareness. It's become such a cultural thing to have convenience, and everything is easy, and I'm as guilty as anybody else about that, but a lot of it is just raising awareness for people to start thinking, well, we can do that. We are actually considering looking at some solar power on the church. We've got a great roof that will do that. And so that's one of the things that the trustees have expressed interest in. And so there have been a number of things. We planted some trees, and I know we've done a number of other things.
All right. One final question for all of you guys, and Bill, we'll start with you. Where would you guys like to see churches be in the next 5 to 10 years when we're talking about creation care?
I think it would be wonderful if churches would keep that a priority, not just around Earth Day, but all through the year, where we're thinking of this as a foundational ethic of our faith. We need to be taking the lead in our communities and in our world. Most faith-based institutions have a creation care ethic, and sure, you need the science and you need other folks doing it, but it's at the heart and soul of who we are as Christians. So I would hope that churches take that seriously. And I think this virus crisis helps us to see, God, if we don't do something, and of course, climate change comes gradually, so it's not like it's coming right now. So the urgency isn't there, but I would hope that our churches could raise awareness and be a prophetic voice to the community, and an example of how you can do this as a society, as a world community.
I think that one of the hardest things that I've seen has been raising the level of interest in people who aren't already interested. And so, what I would love to see happen would be for this to become, as Bill was saying, something that is foundational to the church every day. And I'm not saying there has to be a sermon about it every week, but I would love to hear more of it, more of the theology of creation care coming from the pulpit. It is still something where a lot of the times the programs that we have, they're Kim's programs. I've had responses where someone asked once when we were doing a Martha Ministry event, and someone said, "Are you recycling these plates?" And one woman pointed to me and said, "Well, Kim would like us to." I'd like to see that where it becomes so foundational that it becomes a part of everyday life within the church, where it's not something that just one person has to push forward. And it's like so many things. We're working to expand existing programs, make it a natural part of programs, working with the youth and the children's ministry. And if the kids embrace it, which they are more inclined to, it will make the change throughout the church. So I'm hoping that within the next 5 to 10 years, it just becomes commonplace.
For me, a dream of the next 5 to 10 years for our church is to reclaim our voice in the community around this topic of creation care. And what I mean by that is, as Kim's saying, it's hard for one individual or two people in a congregation to carry this ministry. So it begins with forming a creation care team in the congregation, but then combining our efforts together with other churches, both United Methodist and other denominations, and beginning to look at our community and say, where can we make an impact in the world around us in our community? That really is the basis of the whole Earthkeeper program of the United Methodist Church, is to ask us to move out beyond the walls of our congregation and make a difference in our community. So 10 years from now, I would love to see the church integrated into making our whole community better, whether it's air quality, water, land use, caring for those among us who often bear the brunt of the ecological damage that is done by industry and other organizations. And we become the voice again for the community and for all of creation. And so, as I think about the future of where we are going as a church on this topic, what I really see is us going back to where Bill mentioned earlier, back to the beginning in Genesis, where God has given us the responsibility to tend and to take care of all of God's creation. And it's going to take the voice of the people from God's kingdom to stand up and make that happen.
You know, Jonathan, so often we talk about stewardship in terms of finances, but what you've just said is really stewardship is so much more than that. And part of the stewardship of creation and stewardship of God's gifts is also something we need to take seriously. So we celebrated at the conference office at our new building last year. We were recognized as a gold LEED building. At that time, they had implemented new and stricter standards, and we were one of only 2 buildings in North Carolina at that time that had that designation. So we're doing some of this work at the conference office, and we're really excited about that recognition. You know, as we close, I was thinking about how I kind of got introduced to some of these ideas, and it really wasn't an intentional thing. We didn't talk about it as such. But I grew up on the coast and we would go to the beach. My dad had a boat, so we would go over to Shell Island and he would always pick up the trash that people had left behind. And I think as a result, now I pick up the trash when I'm at the beach. We would go to a cafeteria every once in a while. And his motto was, take all you want, but eat all you take. And, that kind of instituted in my head an idea of how we eat and what we eat and waste. And so it just makes me think that children are watching us. And while mostly adults are listening to this podcast, the influence that we can have on the children in our lives just by setting a good example, whether we talk about it as such, can really make a difference. So I would encourage us in those ways. You all have been wonderful guests. We have really enjoyed our conversation with you today, and just want to say thank you for the work you're doing in the annual conference, in the churches where you serve, and also in the communities and in the world. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you've enjoyed listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCC UMC. That's WNCC UMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Gojo Studios.